Hello, you are listening to the Gamer Librarian Podcast, the best podcast you can find on this side of the multiverse. I am your host, Adrian, and today I will be talking about the video game series Dead Space. Afterwards, be sure to subscribe to be notified when future episodes are released, and show your support by liking and leaving a comment. Thank you for joining. Now, let's just get into the big crux of this entire episode, and that's Dead Space, one of the biggest and most enjoyable horror franchises you could find out there on almost any medium. It was originally a video game spawning about, I think, 4 to 5 games. There's the three main series, and then Dead Space Ignition, and then there might be another one that was also out on the Wii. It also spawned two animated movies straight to DVD, two full-length novels set in between the games, and I believe that should be about it for the franchise. And I've been making my way through it ever since I got the Dead Space Remake video game on the PS5. I've been slowly blasting through that on impossible mode. For anybody who was listening to a few episodes back when I restarted my playthrough on this game, and I've been a big fan of Dead Space for a very long time. I played the originals on the 360, Dead Space 2 and 3 when they came out. I got my 360 like after Dead Space 1 was already out, but whenever I wanted to have a 360 and I would go into GameStop, Dead Space was always one of the games I would look at and be like, oh, one day once I get the console I can have to play that on, I'm gonna get that game. And that and Fable and BioShock and Elder Scrolls Oblivion was like my four first ever games on the Xbox, and like Dead Rising and Gears of War. Like those games are so crucial to me in that era. And Dead Space I hold up with like the same regard for any of those games. I love them all. And Dead Space Remake was really great to be able to relive that same experience, go through the USG Ishimura with Isaac and uncover the mystery of the marker and Aegis 7. And that was extremely fun. I've seen the movies before, but I recently went back and rewatched Dead Space Downfall a few days ago. And Dead Space Downfall is the prequel to the video game, the actual video game. It's set right like a few hours or days before the video game even starts, and you find out about the downfall of Dead Space, the USG Ishimura, the spaceship in it that you fight your way through within the game. And it's to get onto this topic a little earlier than maybe I wanted to, but I think things like this are really good for franchises or just stories and settings for all kinds of media. You know, like people say that, oh, if they had this money to make this little movie, why don't they just make a better game? And it's like, to make an animated movie, it's almost like half the production of making like a even good AAA game. Especially like the pedigree that Dead Space was in 2007 or 8 when the first game came out. Especially now with the remake, which probably cost even way more just to even put out a remake. But I'm a big fan of when they do movies and like tie-in stuff that's not specifically video games. That's always been something that I found enjoyable because it's just a little more of the world and the experience you get, you know? Like, would I have rather like waited 3 to 5 plus years for maybe another game, a Dead Space 4 or something along those lines? Sure, you know, but there's also a lot of caveats with that, whether or not it would have been, you know, a good game or not. And you know, that would probably cost $60 versus a like a $5 rent movie that you can do on Amazon or anything, you know. But I like these. I found them to be very enjoyable. So I watched the first movie again after beating the remake, and that was so fun, so incredible. Being able to see like how the story is told through that perspective, with the lens of like through Isaac and how he experienced it, because it's a very scary tale, and it does not end. There's obviously sequels and stuff, but I think the movies definitely add some nice flavor to them. There's a sequel, Aftermath, which is like the bridge between Dead Space 1 and 2. I'll be watching that a little later on in the future. But to bring it back around to Dead Space Remake, this is a glorious remake, a glorious, really well done remake, and it's so honest about itself. It doesn't add anything new like that's out of place. It feels Isaac having a whole new voice is amazing. Ishimura feeling like a fully fledged place you can explore. Because by the end of the game, you can go back and explore a good chunk of the Ishimura and go back and get what you missed or find secrets and do side quests, which is something that the first game never necessarily had. And that might be like a story pacing issue, but it's still fun for video game's sake is to go back and go and get what you missed, like finding the Pang treasure, if you guys know what those are, or using the nodes to unlock the secret rooms in the remake. That's all really great. So I'll put up pictures around here so you guys can at least see that I'm not just talking out of my ass. But I did beat it on impossible, and it's not impossible. It's totally doable. The beginning of Dead Space Remake is pretty difficult because the plasma cutter is like very underpowered in its first few hours, and you don't really find yourself being able to hold your own until I think you get the Ripper and the line gun. Those are like the two best guns you can have in the game, just for almost any encounter, for almost all the enemies that you fight. The force gun is definitely really good with its alt ability and like it's a gravity well, it just kind of sucks enemies in. You get a kind of like moments of reprieve with that. Um, and the weapons are really good in this game. They feel really nice. They're definitely made a lot better. Like I never used the machine gun in the game, the pulse rifle, because I've notoriously known that to be a bad weapon for Dead Space. But I didn't try it out, but I definitely used on my notes to upgrade it to as far as I could. I used things like the flamethrower and the contact beam, the force gun, Ripper line gun. Those are always really fun. And the necromorphs look beautiful. The game is so well rendered and designed. Every hallway is dark and brooding and spooky. You almost think there's going to be something behind every single corner and shadow. I highly recommend playing with headphones. It's like the best way to play it. There's so many like creaks and groans and leaks and screams that happen throughout the Ishimura as you make your way that even like the normal sounds you hear, like Isaac breathing or walking, could become like potentially scary if you're not expecting to hear that sound because it could sound like somebody else being hurt or moving, and that could be jarring. It's a very scary game. I think for people who haven't played a Dead Space game before, maybe this is your first ever horror game, Dead Space Remake should be your first one. It should be because it just does everything right. Um, it simplifies the controls. It makes the control selections like the modern Dead Space game, and then they had control changes when it came to Dead Space 2 and 3. So those control styles do come back as a selectable option for the remake, which I think is nice. Like your LB button is what you use to run, or I guess it's L1 for PS5, and you don't use the left stick to press down and run like you do in the remake. You use the button, and that's pretty cool. That they kind of kept that legacy kind of mechanic going. I don't see how that's going to change much in any other remakes, but I don't think it would. I would have liked like a fast turn button like Resident Evil has, where if you're facing one direction, you press the button, your character automatically does like a 180 and flips to the other direction. I would have liked that for this game. That just makes like retreating and covering your behind a lot easier because at least the sensitivity I was using was good enough, but it certainly wasn't high enough to be able to like turn a full 180 degrees in combat, or if I'm being pressed from one side and I have to run away. Because Dead Space is a very narrow, cramped game. A lot of your encounters are going to be within tight hallways with the width of mostly just yourself, and even then, it's probably full with like clutter, like crates and wheelchairs and stuff. So you're probably going to be very claustrophobic in this game. You need a lot of room. So turning around, kind of felt like would have been a very nice option, especially when there's enemies that do spawn behind you in encounters. Big rooms, obviously, that's going to happen. But I mean like hallways, like you'll move down a hallway and like an enemy or two will jump out of a vent in front of you, but then you'll have to maybe hear the audio sound of an enemy coming behind you to even know that it's being approaching from your behind, which is concerning in certain combat or difficulty scenarios. But I thought it would have been more beneficial if I had like a button just to quickly tap and just turn around and stuff. I don't know. All the buttons were pretty much used in the controller, so I'm just kind of nitpicking. But that's kind of would have been nice. And for the whole package of Dead Space 1, I think it's really great. I didn't pay full price for it. My girlfriend bought it for me, so I still think it's a full price game that you get all your money's worth for. You get a solid at least 10 to 15 hour story experience if it's your first time playing. And then subsequent playthroughs, obviously, you can do that with New Game Plus and high difficulties. And there's a lot to this game. They made it a lot more conscious of, I think, the sequels that happen afterwards, because there's like a secret ending that ties into it. I'm almost certain the new side quests are completely new for this game, like a different way of telling the story, so you understand what happened to Nicole, Isaac's girlfriend on the Ishimura. And I think it's always was going to be like its own package. It was never really supposed to kind of delve into the other sides of Dead Space, which I think is cool. It keeps its own identity to itself. Um, so you get to like these books where, in my opinion, they do a lot just to like add into the experience of Dead Space, but like the overall lore is never really expanded on, at least in terms of the books. We could talk about that for a minute, for anybody who really wants to listen. Uh, if you read the books, please let me know, because I don't know if anybody else has even read the Dead Space books besides me. But the first Dead Space book, Martyr, actually takes place 200 or so years before even the events of Dead Space. Um, for anybody who doesn't know, a marker was originally found on Earth 200 years ago, and that's what the story of Martyr is. It delves in the character Michael Altman, who anybody familiar with Dead Space would know is technically like the Messiah prophet of the religion Unitology for Dead Space. Dead Space Martyr shows the beginnings of the marker being found and the early beginnings of Unitology, which is pretty cool. Unitology was always like this thing that's always existed in Dead Space, but you never understood how it came about, just because of the way the story works and how it tells you. Obviously, because this book is take place 250 years prior, none of the characters from the book ever appear or are mentioned in the later installments besides Michael Altman. Michael Altman is probably the one that you'll be hearing about the most in every one of these games. People will say praise Altman and things. But if you know the world of Dead Space, you know that everything is bleak and scary and very uncertain when you have things like big corporations and governments looming over you with agendas that are much more important than whether or not you worry about your salary or your life. Fans of Alien or like Starship Troopers, things like that, you'd be right at home with like Dead Space if you love that kind of stuff. Very similar alien horror stuff. Dead Space goes into a little more of the cosmic horror with like the markers and the necromorphs and how that kind of goes around. I don't want to get too deep into like super Dead Space lore. I kind of want to say that for the next episodes when I talk about Dead Space 2 and 3, because I will be playing Dead Space 2 and 3 eventually. I downloaded them on the Xbox because they're on Game Pass, and Dead Space 2 and 3 are losing their I think their server licenses or whatever, so the servers are going down. And not that I really want to play the multiplayer. I'll try, but I think you still need the online pass, which is really stupid. Thanks, EA. But I definitely still want to play Dead Space 2 and 3 after redoing the remake. Um, Dead Space Martyr, I actually think this book could have been better. There's a lot of holes like in the story. Not to really give like a big spoiler, but if you know how like the markers work, they like alter your psyche, your conscious, and they manipulate you into creating more of them by either creating more markers or having you identify the symbols on the markers and turning dead flesh into necromorphs. Now that's pretty much the crux of the markers and what they do. But in Dead Space Martyr, there's like a big plot hole where when they first find the marker, they find that there's these like mutated fish or these like underwater creatures that have been like affected by the marker, and to me that never really made sense of like how that could have come about, because you kind of do need to be like a, at least from what I've seen from the series, like a higher intelligence to be able to like manipulate DNA and get that going. So like it has like a very odd start with how it talks about itself or like introduces the world to you. Um, you find out that the marker has already, I guess, made necromorphs on the planet, which is fine. That never really gets resolved in the book. That's probably my biggest gripe about it. But you find that it delves a lot on Michael Altman and him trying to discover the origins of this anomaly happening on Earth, like this weird signal that they're receiving. And when they find out what it is, he tries to stop it. He becomes the person to try and stop the marker from being used or recreated by like higher ups in whatever government is prevalent at the time. I don't think it's the CEC or EarthGov. I think they don't form yet in this book. But it has one of the coolest endings, like really one of the coolest endings, where Michael Altman, absolute spoiler alert for this whole book, but it is what it says. It's Dead Space martyr. Michael Altman is a martyr. He dies for the creation of unitology, not because he wants to, but because he's literally manipulated in a what would it be called, in like a conspiracy theory where like the higher governments set him up to die tragically, um, so that he can become a martyr for the Unitology, like for the church. They kidnap him. They blame him for the loss of the marker. They blame him for um, not doing his job with getting the information out to the public, which he does try to do, but they use that against him in the story. And they put him in a room with nothing but like a spoon, and then they set a necromorph on him. And Michael Artman most surely died defending himself with a spoon against a necromorph, which is something. I certainly wouldn't want to be in that situation. That seems very tough. So that's how Dead Space Martyr is, and I liked it. I kind of would have wished it maybe delved a little more into Dead Space like lore specifically. I know it's 250 years before the main game, so there's not a whole lot you can get there, but you spend a little bit of time with Michael Altman and some of the other characters in it, and you don't really get to really have like an everlasting impression on them. They all seem to be pretty much like their cookie cutter like selves, like your generic like bigwig corporate guys, your military dudes, and your main characters in here are alright, but they're very cryptic. Some of them, like the young boy and the witch lady early on in the book, they're very cryptic. Unknown how they even fit into the story like afterwards. But I liked it, for its entirety of 300 or so pages. I really liked it. So this book probably is one of my like maybe not top 10, but like close to top 10 like video game books that I've read so far. Just because it's a nice little like addition to seeing how if Earth did find a marker on Earth, how it reacted, and obviously the consequences that caused for the rest of the series. Really good. So I hope anybody gets a chance to read that, because when we get to Dead Space Catalyst, this book is pretty much its own isolated incident. It takes place sometime between the events of Dead Space. Um, I think it actually takes place before Dead Space 2, but maybe before Dead Space 1, because after the events of Dead Space Martyr, right, guys? 100 years later, the government starts to bring about the marker project again, where they start making markers on secret locations. And one of the locations is Aegis 7. One of the locations is another Black Ops site, but this story, Cataclysm, delves into how a marker was built and experimented on the planet of Aspera, I think, which is like a penal colony, like where criminals are held. Um, These are like political prisoners. So the main characters of the story, you follow the characters of Istvan and Jensi. They're brothers who grew up poor, and one of them, Jensi, is very like strong-willed, like independent, and Istvan is he needs help. He has like a mental disorder. He has like fits of paranoia and violence. So that's the whole crux of the story. You follow these two brothers, and it does delve into like deeper Dead Space stuff, but it's its own incident. It doesn't really um, impact the later on events in the game series. None of these characters come back. It even ends on like a really really dark cliffhanger where it just like abruptly ends and things just aren't happy. And I thought it was great. For people who probably seen the movie Alien 3, that also takes place on like a penal colony, like penitentiary kind of planet, very similar. I thought this book was actually more enjoyable than the first book. I liked it more than Martyr because it had a lot more going on for the brothers. Like the brother dynamic between those two main characters was so much more driving than I would say the mystery of the marker, because like about it, you understand what the marker is. If you're reading Dead Space Martyr, you've probably played the games before. I doubt people would play or read the book before playing the games, but that might happen. So like having that kind of prior knowledge definitely dampens the experience. But Dead Space Catalyst, even if you know what the story like typically entails, you don't know how it's going to play out. You really don't, because once like it has a very slow burn. It takes a while for like the initial outbreak to really start going, but the lead up to it is really great, absolutely great. It you follow mostly Jensi when he's separated from his brother at an early age after their mom passes. He intermittently finds his brother again in um, uh, differencing scenarios of stress and anxiety. And when they get separated for the final time, he finds out that his brother Istvan is actually being held as a political prisoner. So he goes to find him in that prison, and then obviously the bigger outbreak kind of ensues around there. Um, you can see that coming a mile away, perfectly fine. But it was actually a really nice story between like two brothers who one has always looked after the other, and that will inevitably be his downfall, is the fact that he chooses and wants to help his brother even at the cost of his life, which is very commendable. It's very admirable. Um, that's about the best thing I can say about the book is probably the two characters. If you had to do like a co-op Dead Space game, absolutely Dead Space Catalyst, right? Like you have one character who's just like relatively right in the head. The marker still kind of affects them, but then you play as the other character, the brother, who is actually much more susceptible and already damaged before like being impacted by the marker. So that's like a really cool dynamic. I know they do that similarly with things like Dead Space 3's co-op, but I don't know. Dead Space Catalyst was certainly like a nice read while I was redoing the games and stuff, because it's a very different take. You don't see that same kind of familial connection in a lot of the Dead Space franchise. Dead girlfriends and all. It's very odd that a character is going to be looking for somebody who's actually still alive in these series. Usually looking for somebody who's been dead for a while. Um, but that's Dead Space Catalyst. Both books, Martyr and Catalyst, really great for fans of Dead Space. I absolutely recommend reading them because they're just more Dead Space. That's all it really comes down to. Where at least with me, when it comes to things in newer mediums, that's not a video game, right? It's just more of the same universe. Maybe you'll have a character that you already know or a setting that's already cool to you, and they flesh that out for whatever you want to read or watch. But at the end of the day, I just want to see more of the same stuff, And for me, Dead Space, if there's spaceships, blood and gore, and monsters, weird markers being found in planets, but also like made, and they Affect Our Psyche. That's awesome. That's awesome to me. That sounds like the perfect mix of um, space and cosmic horror that you could ever find. So fans of like Alien, Lovecraft, Dead Space is truly like the best mix you can get from any of these. And it's not over. The things I talk about right now, Dead Space Remake, the two books, and the movie, there's still more. There's two sequel video games. I don't think I'll play Dead Space Ignition just because I know that game's like a really short arcadey puzzly game. I might pass on that. There's comic books, which I believe there's a comic that has to delve with the Ishimura again, and then there's a comic that has to deal with Carver, the co-op character you play as in Dead Space 3. And then there's another movie, which is the bridge between Dead Space 1 and 2. So anyone who's played Dead Space games like the remake or the originals, read the books, seen the movies, please leave a comment because this is a wonderful franchise that I don't think has the right to just be left to die after a remake. You know, EA, I know you're probably doing your best to put out whatever actually polished, full-fledged titles you can that aren't like money grab loot box things. But remake was an absolute good step in direction, the absolute right foot that you could really just get a good platform for yourselves again. Dead Space is the best horror franchise you have next to Resident Evil. Like, better than whatever Silent Hill has been in the last few years. The most recent Resident Evil games are like good, close comeuppance to the newer remake games, but or like the newer remake for Dead Space. But I don't see any other game outshining Dead Space in its atmospheric setting, in its combat for a horror game. I think its combat is truly like not revolutionary, but like stick twitchy, you know, because you can kind of make it like a game where you have to cut off the limbs as efficient as possible rather than just shooting in the head as much as you want. There's differences between the gameplay, in my opinion, between those two games. But I would definitely prefer Dead Space's gameplay over Resident Evil. You know, all the similarities aside, because you can get currencies, go to stores, upgrade your weapons, and you get so many stuff. I just prefer the Dead Space setting overall. It seems like a much more menacing, kind of horrible place to be. Um, yeah, I plan on playing Dead Space 2 and 3 in the future. I liked Dead Space 2 a lot because it was the game that I think really pushed horror games into a bigger mainstream, right? If you guys remember the trailer for Dead Space 2, I'm sorry, the marketing campaign for Dead Space 2, where your mom's gonna hate this, and it was just trailers of moms playing Dead Space and being grossed out by like the overarching gore and stuff. That was really fun. That's one of like the more memorable things about Dead Space that I remember was the ad campaign for it. So that's Dead Space, you know. Um, that's really all I have to say on that for this episode. I've been not really doing much else besides Dead Space. I recently got Sonic Frontiers. I blasted through the first world, Kronos Island, I believe. So that was really fun. And now I'm on the second island, hunting for like the crystal, the emeralds, and then the keys and whatever the little like currencies you can get. That's about as big gameplay as you get. It's do levels, earn stuff. You have like smaller little quests that you can earn these collectible stuff on, and then you have like smaller sub levels which are more Sonic-y. It's like your more traditional Sonic levels, which is fine. Those seem pretty abundant, maybe like 5 or 6 per world, I would say. And you can do them as many times as you want and try to get more collectibles. I I like this game. I like Sonic Frontiers, and I'm glad that Sonic has a game that's different. And maybe it's not different in the right way that I would say, but it's different enough that I think people are accepting of it. It has great gameplay. You run fast. The combat is okay for a Sonic game. It's simple. I think it should be simple. It has a lot more to it than I thought it would. You have like super moves and skill moves and combos and all that stuff. That was some really surprising stuff to see in a Sonic game because I think Sonic Frontiers is the building blocks for like a better Sonic game. I really think that. I think this game took like 5 to 6 years to actually build and make. I could be wrong on that, but I know it's been like a while since we've had it announced years ago, and then it came out like last year, and it kind of did well. Um, but I think it has the building blocks for a really good Sonic game. If you take all the combat that you have and all that cool mechanics for like the speed and the running. The auto camera is kind of cool. It's a little janky when it comes to targeting on enemies. Certain enemies, like if you run past them, you'll automatically just lock on to them, like for the camera. So you like where you have like a quick little animation where you have to watch the enemy for a while. Um, that could be like gone in the next game, but I think if you give this game like some real good polish, you make the worlds a little more intriguing because it does seem like the worlds, the Kronos Island and whatever the desert one is called, are just big zones. They're just big zones to run around in, and that's perfectly fine. Absolutely, it's a big sandbox game for your Sonic game. Totally commendable to have it like that. But fill it up a little bit, you know. Don't have so many like collectible stuff. Collecting all these keys and these hearts and those blue and red things, whatever they are. Those are it becomes a lot, and I just kind of stopped counting whatever I get. I'll just do stuff, and if I earn it, I'll earn it, and I'll try to get upgrades for it. But you even collected like these like hundreds of eggs. You get these eggs that can increase your ring capacity or your speed and other kind of stuff. And there's so many of them. I've already collected 200 because there's an achievement to get 200 or so of them, and that's fine, you know. But there's a lot of those eggs, and not for nothing, but they're not Chow. Uh, Crime, an absolute crime to not make those things the Chow or not have the Chow in the game at all. I don't know if there are, but I don't think they are. I haven't seen them be mentioned um, in any news around Sonic Frontiers, but I miss Chow. Shout out to Sonic Adventure 2 for like being the last game to I think even feature Chow. But I think it's just a good step for Sonic. I like that they're doing a big mix between 3D and 2D. I think that should be the sweet spot for Sonic. 2D is kind of like a half foot in, half foot out kind of mentality once you look at like how other games are doing it, and they could certainly do a 3D Sonic game. That's been a thing for a while. Sonic Heroes, Sonic Unleashed. Those are about the only two good ones. That's really about it. But yeah, Sonic's great. It's very nice to see Sonic get some love again. I know he has some other side-scrolling Sonic games coming out. I don't know if those will be on my radar anytime soon. I'm not really a bigger fan of the side-scrolling Sonic games. I'm just more here just to support Sonic. You know, my girlfriend got me this game, and I'm gonna play through it, beat it, just because I like Sonic. I like playing through these games, and I want to see him get more properties outside of like video games or maybe a new show or something. But Sonic is a legacy character for gaming. He shouldn't be forgotten just because he's had a few down ruts in the last few years. So that's Sonic. I'll probably leave off with me playing Baldur's Gate 3 at the release date whenever it comes out. I pre-ordered the deluxe edition, so I get access to like 72 hours early access to the chapter 1 act 1 of the game, which is fine. You get a host of other stuff, but I was really dying to play this game. I had a bunch of friends asking me if I was going to, and I caved in and I did it once. Well, like I found out like 4 of us could just play together, so we're gonna do that. I think I'm gonna play as a gnome wizard to start off as like my first character for the game. I've never played a gnome in any of my time playing D&D, so that's why I'm picking gnome, but I always choose a magic class. Like anytime I start out on an RPG, it's magic first always. Elder Scrolls, any kind of like tabletop RPG, I always choose like something along the lines of magic. That's what I've always been had an affinity for. So yeah, there really isn't much else. It's been a really slow time. At least for games and books. I've been trying to delve into a little more of the video game books, so I hopefully in the future I'll have like more episodes like this where it's a lot more centered on video games and video game books in like its own kind of category. I know Dragon Age is gonna have a time like that. Like you guys can absolutely expect me to gush over Dragon Age once an actual release date for Dragon Age 4 is released. Once a hard date is put for that game, I will be going through the 3 main games. I'll be watching the 1 or 2 movies I think they have. There's a Netflix show, and I'll be reading through the 5 books and like the 12 comics they have. I will absolutely do that for you guys when that happens because I want to have that experience. I want to be able to read the first 2 Dragon Age books, which are like seem like the most boring shit in the world, but I'm gonna love it. I'm gonna love it. Asunder is a really good Dragon Age book, and Dragon Age is a really good time. Absolutely really good time. There's Mass Effect books. I'll probably do a reread of the Mass Effect books and maybe do a replay of the Mass Effect trilogy at some point. Maybe Andromeda. I don't know. I don't have all that much time in me. A lot of things are coming out, and by the time of this podcast being put out, I don't know what I'll be playing by then. Maybe I'll have Dead Space 2 finished or not. That's very uncertain. But to everyone who's still listening here, thank you. Like I try to do is just get an episode out once a week or so and just talk to you guys about books and games. That's really all I've been trying to do. And this week it was very nice to talk about Dead Space. It was very nice to be able to like put time in to talk about the Dead Space franchise as a whole, not just the new games like the remake, but like the books as well, because that's part of the legacy that Dead Space has and a lot of these other games has, is that they do branch out besides of their video game installments. There's so many good books and comics and movies and other media that's tied into video games that are so beloved and so enjoyed that they shouldn't be forgotten. And I most certainly don't think that they should just be never used again. I don't ever want another Assassin's Creed movie if it's going to be like the last one, but I would absolutely be accepting of a new one. I like it to be a little more along the lines of an actual Assassin's Creed movie, but that's just me. You take what you can get. I'm just a fan, and if it's going to have the title of Dead Space on it, I'm going to buy it. That's just going to be me. So here's looking out for Dead Space 2 remake whenever that's released or announced, because I would love to play that game again. I think they need to do a lot more in terms of the graphics. Looking at it again, it looks like it could use definitely a polish along the lines of Dead Space Remake 1, but I don't know what else they could add to the game, and I'll probably just leave it off at that. Until next time, make us whole. Altman be praised. This has been episode 19 of the Gamer Librarian Podcast. Be sure to subscribe for updates on future episode releases. Leave a like and comment on what games or books I should talk about in the future. Thank you, and see you next time.